ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
When those players were silent at the start of their first match in Australia, that silence was heard as a roar all around the world. And the world wanted to know, and Australians wanted to know, how we would respond. We responded by saying the invitation is there. In Australia, you can be safe, you will be welcomed, you will be at home.
Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke on Wednesday morning as he announced 2 more Iranian soccer professionals had been granted asylum. By the afternoon, one of those women had changed her mind and opted to head home, and it underlines the fraught nature of the situation. At time of publish, 6 members of the Iran soccer team will be staying in Australia. Astonishing details of secret communications are emerging. Elation is morphing into hard realities for those at the centre of this story. The remainder of the team has left the country facing, well, who can really know? The reaction in Iran has been nasty. So what comes next? I'm Patrick Stack. This is ABC Sport Daily. Amanda Shalala is a senior reporter with ABC Sport. She has led the coverage on this story for the last week or so. Amanda, let's start in Sydney last night. What happened as the flight out of Australia loomed for the Iran football team? And how did authorities communicate with the women to figure out who wanted to stay and who did not?
It was a very tense situation last night, Stacky. So the team had been staying on the Gold Coast throughout the Women's Asian Cup. As it progressed and more scrutiny was on the team, the security presence around the hotel, both the Australian security presence and the security figures within the team, tightened. We were told that the players were essentially like prisoners in their hotel. They weren't really allowed to speak with anyone, fraternise with anyone, and no one could get to them. So on Monday night, there was the 5 players that managed to break away from the group and they were able to seek asylum. Then there were another 2, a staff member and another player, that were able to separately then stay in Brisbane and also say that they wanted to seek asylum. So that meant the absolute last chance for any other player or staff member was when they were transiting through Sydney Airport through customs last night on their way to Kuala Lumpur. So Australian officials were able to intercept them through customs and got each of them one-on-one. The Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, spoke about this today.
Each player and each member of the team, with the exception of a small number of people where we had made the decision that we did not want to make a direct offer to them, but all the players remaining and most of the support people were taken into interview rooms without any minders present, simply themselves and the Department of Home Affairs and an interpreter. And they were given a choice.
So last night, no others decided to take up that offer from the Australian government. They all ended up boarding the plane and went on to Kuala Lumpur, and we believe on their way to Turkey to then get a bus to Iran. And so we have also heard, this has not been verified, but potentially that there was another player who also wanted to stay but ended up boarding the plane.
There was one person where conversations with family were happening, and we weren't sure which way that person would go. That individual, though, ultimately made their own decision.
So it was a very complex, very tense and very dramatic situation which rapidly evolved over the past few days after building up for a week or so.
Tony Burke spoke to the media this morning to explain about the 2 Iranians who were joining the 5 players who he granted asylum on Monday night to. What has happened since that press conference this morning that has altered the situation?
In question time today, Tony Burke said that one of the 2 women who had decided that she wanted to stay in Australia yesterday, so there was the 5 on Monday, then an additional 2 yesterday, had changed her mind. Apparently, she spoke to some of her teammates who had boarded the plane and had decided that, no, she wanted to go back to Iran, and apparently they advised her to speak to the Iranian embassy, and by doing so, she then revealed the location of the other team members, where they were.
As a result of that, it meant that the Iranian embassy now knew the location of where everybody was. I immediately gave the instruction for people to be moved, and that's been dealt with immediately.
That is a very tough situation as well. You had the 7 that looked like they were going to stay in Australia and seek asylum, but now we've had this very late development that there is this one extra person, and we're unsure yet whether it was the staff member or the player who asked for asylum yesterday. We're not sure which one it is at this stage that has now asked to return to Iran.
Is there any indication as to whether that person was under, a perceived level of threat or pressure that was, ratcheted up upon them?
At this stage, that's something that I can't speculate on. The government hasn't shared any details around that. All that Home Affairs has confirmed is that this person had asked to stay, spoke to teammates who were on the plane, then changed her mind and decided to go. And Tony Burke said that.
In Australia, people are able to change their mind, people are able to travel. And so we respect the context in which she has made that decision.
I think that is something, though, we will, of course, follow up. That's very important to find out. Why did she change her mind? Was she under any pressure? We don't know. Did she have the chance to speak to people while she was in that safe location here and found out some information that made her change her mind? We don't know any of that. That's all speculation. And so I think it's important to not go down that path until we do find out the exact reasons.
I found it interesting that in Tony Burke's initial press conference this morning, he mentioned that not everyone in the Iranian group was offered asylum. What was he driving to there?
So ever since the team arrived in Australia about a week and a half ago, there were some members of the Iranian Australian community which raised concerns with the Australian government and specifically with Home Affairs, saying that one member or potentially more from the delegation had links to the IRGC. The IRGC is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and that is listed as a terrorist organisation in Australia. Under Australian law, anyone who is a member of that organisation would not be granted a visa into the country, and if there was anyone found to have links to the IRGC while they were in Australia, they would be deported. But there has still been concerns from many members of the Iranian Australian community that there may be people embedded with that team that still have links to the regime, that still have loyalties to the regime and the Iranian government, and have potentially been posing as different team members within the staff, whether it's a team official or a media manager or things like that. That has been the greatest concern, that there are people monitoring the movements of these players and people posing as security staff or other staff members within the team that perhaps are relaying messages or pressure from the regime. And so Tony Burke did confirm that when they went to speak to all those players last night and staff members last night, there was a small group of which the Australian officials did not offer asylum to.
You make some fairly blunt decisions in my job as to where there are people who might fall on the right side of criminality, but you think fall on the wrong side of character. And so they're the people who we were quite happy to see leave Australia.
So he didn't elaborate further on that, but to sum it up, there was no one with recorded IRGC links given a visa, according to Home Affairs, but potentially people that are not necessarily people who would be welcome here, that happened to be here and were not offered asylum.
Moving to the 6 people who have opted to stay in Australia. For those Iranians, it's easy to see this as a happy ending, inverted commas, but it's way more complicated than that. What kind of response has their decision drawn in Iran?
It's such a complicated situation. It would be very one-sided for us to just look at this through an Australian lens and think, how great, celebrate, isn't it fantastic? But for these players, it must have been an incredibly heart-wrenching decision to make. I've spoken to Raha Pulbakash, who's a sports journalist and presenter at Iran International TV, which is an independent UK-based Persian language news service, and she's really been at the forefront of this story. She's been the one who's been speaking to the players throughout and getting a lot of messages to them about, here are your options if you do want to seek asylum, this is what you can do. And she said the players have been under so much pressure even before they came here. She said before they even came to Australia, they had threats from the regime. There were financial bonds in place, essentially threats that their assets could be seized, their families' assets could potentially be seized if they didn't return, and threats of punishment as well. So we have heard that those punishments could be things like jail time, or in the worst case scenario, even execution. Throughout the escalating violent crackdowns on anti-government protesters in Iran over the past couple of months, we have seen that many civilians have been killed. So that was the fear of what may happen to these women. In terms of the latest developments and the latest response, we're hearing that there is still potentially threats against these players' families who have decided to stay. And so that is very concerning for them, and they're very worried about that. And the president of the Football Federation of Iran, Mehdi Taj, himself a former commander of the IRGC, so heavily linked to the regime, he has spoken out. He has claimed that the players were pressured into seeking asylum and has essentially accused the Australian government of using this as a political trap or a political tool. In the context of all of that, the reaction from the regime side of things in Iran has been very negative. They have been condemning the players throughout, and there are still very real concerns for the safety of these players' families.
And what happens now for the women who have opted to stay in Australia? Obviously, just the simple next day-to-day steps, but also sport. I mean, it's a secondary thought, but I understand we've seen A-League women's clubs eager to integrate the women into the Australian football system.
First and foremost, the priority will be to find them somewhere to settle, to connect them with the Iranian Australian community as well, to find them work. These are some things that they spoke about. We don't speak English. How are we going to get jobs? How do things work here? They spoke to a migration agent yesterday who shared some of these details with ABC News, and my colleague Nasim Khadem, who's been amazing in reporting this story as well. And so I think that's number one priority, get them set up for life in Australia. And then potentially from a sporting perspective, Brisbane Roar has said, you can come, we will support you if you want to train with us, if you need help getting set up to play here. We know how much of an important tool sport can be for refugees and migrants in Australian society to help them to adjust, make new friends, get used to life here. So that happened with the Afghan women's football team when they came to Australia after the Taliban takeover in 2021, and they were taken under the wing of Melbourne Victory. So potentially something similar could happen to these women as well. But I think an important element is to remember those who have returned too. We don't know all the reasons of why they have returned, whether it was the threat of punishments of their families. This is not one collective voice. There are many individuals in this group, so perhaps some of them are regime aligned. We don't know. This is speculation, and we're going to try and find out more details. But I think it's important not to forget them, to keep following up this story and see what happens with them, because while it may be a good news story in some parts for those who have come here, there's still concerns for those families and still concerns for those that have returned.
Amanda Shalala, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ducky.
Headlines. Did you hear about Hawthorn players Dylan Moore and Connor McDonald getting in a bit of trouble in the USA during the off-season? The Hawks pair spent the night locked up after a boozy hit-out saw them in trouble for trespassing. Moore is no longer vice-captain, and many assume it cost him a shot at the club's co-captaincy. Here's coach Sam Mitchell addressing that assumption.
Even without this, I was the right person to go to be a co-captain with James. And how Dylan's position came about was it became a bit more obvious for us that he wasn't going to be as available in that area where we didn't think that was appropriate. So it didn't change the co-captaincy decision and the leadership model as a whole.
The Hawks season opener comes Friday night against bitter rivals Essendon. Basketball, where Miami centre Bam Adebayo made NBA history with the second most points from an individual in a game as he scored 83 against the hapless Washington Wizards. That second all-time, Kobe Bryant famously had 81. Wilt Chamberlain remains top with 100 in a game. And Socceroos coach Tony Popovich has revealed he met with Eddie Jones in Tokyo to pick the rugby coach's brains about World Cup preparation. Yes, Jones did have a rough time with the 2023 World Cup with the Wallabies, but Popovich says he learned much from the rugby coach and expects to lean on other leaders from across codes. Just finally, podcast apps, they're always evolving. So to make sure our new episodes keep showing up in your old feed, add us to your playlist by tapping the follow or plus sign button on the show image. I'm Patrick Stack. This is ABC Sport Daily, produced by Poppy Penny.
Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.